Gender Pay Gap, presented by Madeline Braun. Overview. This presentation will explore the gender pay gap. This topic is one of the most debated forms of inequality in the labor market. I will focus on two peer-reviewed studies that examine the causes of the pay gap between men and women. Blau and Kahn's 2017 article, The Gender Wage Gap, Extent, Trends, and Explanations, and Shaw and Whedon's 2014 article, Overwork and the Persistence of Gender Segregation in Occupations. This presentation highlights both structural and cultural explanations for why the gap continues to exist. Introduction. The gender pay gap refers to the difference in average earnings between men and women, even when education, experience, and occupation are considered. Although the wage gap has narrowed since the 1980s, women in the United States still earn roughly 80 to 85 cents for every dollar earned by men. This inequality has large implications, shaping not only economic security for women, but also the bigger issues of poverty, family stability, and workplace fairness. Understanding why this gap persists is critical for developing effective strategies to promote equality. Research question. This presentation seeks to answer two central questions. What are the main factors that contribute to the gender pay gap, and how do workplace practices such as overwork reinforce inequality? By addressing these questions, we can better understand the interaction between individual choices, institutional structures, and cultural norms. The goal is not just to identify the existence of the pay gap, but to analyze the deeper mechanisms that sustain it despite decades of reform efforts and public awareness campaigns. Article 1 citation. The first study examined is Blau and Kahn's The Gender Wage Gap, Extent, Trends, and Explanations, published in the Journal of Economic Literature in 2017. This article provides a comprehensive review of labor market data and identifies the central factors behind wage disparities. It is especially useful because it situates the pay gap in a historical context, showing the problem has evolved over time and which explanations remain relevant today. Article 1 Methods. Blau and Kahn's study takes a broad perspective analyzing U.S. labor market data as well as international comparisons. They review trends from the 1980s onwards, demonstrating that while progress has been made, the gap has remained relatively stable in recent decades. Their focus is on large-scale structural explanations such as occupational segregation, differences in work experience, and labor market discrimination. This article stands out because it brings together many studies and shows the different sides of the gender pay gap. Article 1 Key Findings. The authors find that the gender pay gap has narrowed considerably since the 1980s, but has remained stuck at about 15 to 20% for the past 2 decades. They identify three main contributors to the gap: occupational segregation, where men and women tend to work in different industries and job types; differences in accumulated work experience, often tied to caregiving responsibilities; and direct and indirect discrimination. A particularly important insight is the motherhood penalty, in which women face wage losses after having children, compared to the fatherhood premium, where men often earn more after becoming fathers. Article 1 Implications. The findings suggest that solving the pay gap requires more than equal pay laws. It also requires addressing structural barriers that affect women's career trajectories. Policies such as paid family leave, affordable childcare, and flexible work arrangements are key to reducing the motherhood penalty and enabling women to remain in the workforce without financial disadvantage. Blau and Kahn also argue that cultural attitudes towards gender roles must also shift for true equality to be achieved. because workplace policies alone cannot eliminate deeply rooted social expectations. Article 2 Citation. The second study of Chaw and Whedon's Overwork and the Persistence of Gender Segregation in Occupations, published in Gender and Society in 2014. This article complements Blau and Kahn's macro-level analysis by focusing on specific workplace phenomenon, overwork, and the expectation that employees work extremely long hours, and its relationship to gender inequality. Article 2 Overview. Shaw and Whedon examine how the culture of overwork, especially in professional and high paying occupations, contributes to the persistence of gender inequality. Their study argues that because men are more likely to work very long hours and workplaces increasingly reward those who do so, women are at a structural disadvantage. This disadvantage is tied to caregiving and family responsibilities, which often limit a woman's ability to meet the extreme demands of overwork. Article 2 Methods. The authors use quantitative analysis of national labor force survey data to identify patterns in work hours and occupational segregation. They compare men and women's likelihood of overwork across different fields, as well as the financial rewards associated with long hours. This approach allows them to show how overwork functions, not just as a cultural expectation, but as a mechanism that sustains wage inequality. Article 2 Key Findings. Chaw and Whedon find that overwork is increasingly associated with higher pay, greater promotion opportunities, and more prestige. Men disproportionately benefit because they are more likely to work over 50 hours a week. Women, on the other hand, are often unable to meet these demands due to unequal family responsibilities, leading to a slower career advancement and lower earnings. The result is that overwork deepens existing gender inequalities even in high status occupations where men and women have similar qualifications. Article 2 Implications. This study highlights the cultural expectation of the ideal worker, someone who is always available and prioritizes work above all else. Because women are disproportionately penalized for prioritizing family responsibilities, this expectation reinforces occupational segregation and wage inequality. Shaw and Whedon argued that workplace reforms such as flexible schedules, equal parental leave, and the normalization of shorter work weeks are critical for reducing these structural disadvantages. Comparison of articles. Together, these two studies provide complementary perspectives on the gender pay gap. Blau and Kahn's emphasize structural inequalities such as occupational segregation and discrimination, while Chaw and Whedon focus on workplace level practices like overwork that reinforce inequality on a daily basis. Both studies highlight the importance of policy reforms and cultural change. Taken together, they show that the gender pay gap is not simply about individual choice, but about systemic forces that reward men and penalize women in the labor market. Conclusion. In conclusion, the gender pay gap remains a persistent issue that reflects both structural and cultural inequalities. Occupational segregation and the motherhood penalty and overwork norms combine to disadvantage women across industries and professions. While progress has been made, lasting change requires both systemic policy forces such as paid family leave and flexible work, and broader cultural shifts in how we value caregiving in work. Understanding the complexity of this issue is essential for creating a fairer and more equitable labor market. References. Thank you very much for the wonderful semester. Wishing you all the best.